Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Trent, and this is the Fireside Book Club podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about books. It's pretty straightforward. I hope to share the love of reading and rekindle, reading for people who maybe lost the joy of it or just, got distracted by life and they don't read as much, or really maybe you're someone that never really has, been into reading, and hopefully this podcast can make it a bit more interesting, because I do believe reading is a dying art in today's day and age. So any way that I can do something to change that and try to inspire new readers and returning readers, or keep current readers going, that's awesome. So this is episode 2 of the podcast, and this is really exciting because this is going to be the first episode where we dive into our first book. Now, in case you didn't know or didn't hear, our first book is going to be Terry Pratchett's Going Postal. So this is a one book of a 43-book series. It's called Discworld. Basically, it's a flat world that's like a disc that's on elephants, which are standing on a turtle. It's a fun fantasy world, and I don't think you have to read the books in any kind of order, but it seems like Discworld has this really fun cult following, and there's a lot of videos about which books you should start with, which books you should read in order, just to get a better understanding of the world and the story. And that's how I came across Going Postal. Someone recommended this. I forgot who. It was a while ago. But Going Postal is a great introduction because it's a bit more traditional in terms of the storytelling, and it's a good one-off book if you want to, dip your toe into the Discworld series. So that is what we're doing, Going Postal, and we're reading 3 chapters at a time. So we're going to be covering the prologue all the way to chapter 3. So if you guys haven't read yet, go ahead, pause the podcast, get your own copy, your own version of Going Postal, and read up to chapter 3 and come on back. Because there's a lot to cover. A lot of things happen in a few chapters, so this might be a fairly long episode. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And by the way, this is new to me as well. I've never really done book talks like a lot, so it might take me a while to come up with a solid formula of covering books. And of course, any recommendation or if you criticize anything I do, I appreciate it. If you want to critique, and say, hey, Apollo, maybe, or Trent, you should focus on, doing this, or focus on doing that, or whatever. This is a learning adventure for me. So, it's been fun. So, yeah, that's what we're doing. Again, Terry Pratchett's Going Postal. If you haven't gotten your copy, go ahead and get it now and read chapter 3. And like I said, each podcast episode is going to be 3 chapters at a time until we finish the book. There's only 14 chapters, so we'll probably finish this in like 4 or 5 episodes. Really just depends on, I could want to slow down a little bit. Maybe there's a lot going on and I really want to break it down. But 4 or 5 podcast episodes, and then we'll be moving on to our next book, which is really exciting. So, we have a couple things I want to announce before we jump into our book talk. The first thing is that Halloween is right around the corner, and Halloween's probably my second favorite holiday next to Thanksgiving, which is, both those holidays are very American. I know other people celebrate Halloween, but it's really big in America. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked here. We're going to have a Halloween challenge. Now, on the Discord, that's what I forgot to mention. Guys, if you're not a part of the Discord for this podcast, please do. Remember, this podcast is very interactive. I want to interact with you guys. I want to see what you guys are saying about certain books. I enjoy it so much. So it's a big community of book lovers. So join the Discord, because we're going to have some fun stuff that we're going to do. And that is the Halloween special challenge. And what we're going to do, so recently I took my wife on a little camping trip for her birthday. And we were sitting around the campfire, and she's like, hey, tell me some scary stories. Now, I'm not a very creative person, and I can't come up with stories right out of the blue. So I looked up some campside, fireside stories. And a lot of them weren't that great. There was a couple good ones in there, but most of them were kind of lame. Now it could be that I'm just like, I didn't go to a good website or something. That might be the case, but it inspired me to, to come up with this idea of, hey, let's write our own scary story, like campfire stories. And this will be a special Halloween episode. So this is how it's going to work. On the Discord, you will submit a 500 to 550 or less word story. So these are short stories. Obviously, you don't want like this epic tale while you're around the campfire. People are going to lose interest. They just want to hear a quick story that gives them the spooks. All right. So what you're going to do is, in a Word document, Google Docs, something like that, you're going to write your 500 word story or less, and you're going to submit it to an admin because we got to make sure like it's appropriate. We don't want people uploading, strange things to the Discord. So you're going to send it to an admin, and then the admin will post it on a channel on the Discord. And then what's going to happen is that there will be a cutoff date. So the last day you can submit, and with all the stories up there, people are going to read them. Again, they're short, so they shouldn't take too long to read, depending on how many stories there are, but I can't imagine we'll have too many. And the viewers, you guys, or the members in the Discord will vote on their favorite stories, and I will take the top 3 stories and read them in the Halloween special episode. And I will also write my own story as well, and I'll save that as the 4th story because I think I got a pretty good story. After reading some other people's campsite, scary stories, I kind of like, I saw where they fell short. It's like, oh, this kind of fell short here, or this didn't really land here. So I think I got a pretty good story, which I'm going to be working on soon, which I'm excited. So yeah, you'll find more information about this on the Discord, and the Discord is linked in the description of the YouTube channel. I don't know if you're using a podcast platform. I'm not sure if I can link a Discord link in the description. It might be possible. Again, I'm kind of new to podcasting, but worst case, go to YouTube, type in Fireside Book Club podcast. You'll find the channel, subscribe to it, of course, and then go to the videos in the description. You'll see the invite to the Discord. So before we get started with the book talk, I do want to talk about the author a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I think, having a decent understanding of the author can help us understand the book a little bit. So Terry Pratchett, formerly known as Sir Terry Pratchett. So yes, he was knighted. So he's a British author, and he, I think it was knighted in 1998. He was knighted for the services to literature, which is really cool. That just shows like how like this. He's not an obscure author or anything like that. Of course, he's most famous for his 41 books. So there's 41 Discworld books. They're comic fantasy novels, and they are certainly funny. He is a very funny author, and that's what I can see in the first just few chapters. I found myself laughing many times out loud, which is pretty rare for me when I'm reading a book. So he has a great way of like setting the mood, setting the scene, and describing characters' mannerisms as they're talking, and it just really sets up the comedy. It's just funny. And I'll describe some of my favorite scenes in today's podcast in the first 3 chapters. So yeah, he won a ton of awards. He's clearly a gifted author. And he's just a funny, witty guy, and that is definitely what you find in these books. He also covers a lot of modern issues in his books. Now, this is something that I'm not a huge fan of. I personally don't like when a story addresses modern issues because it kind of dates the story. So when time goes on, people will look back at these stories and they might not understand the full context of the issue at hand because it's a very of the time issue. That's when you look at stories like the Iliad or Lord of the Rings. There's no modern issue. I mean, there's definitely themes of like Lord of the Rings is definitely a commentary on industrialism, but it's there's a lot of themes in there that are just about the universal human condition, like the Iliad, which is an ancient Greek epic poem that everybody can relate to because it's about like just the human condition. So when you put in social issues or government issues or whatever, it can date the story. That's not to say that it makes these stories bad. I still enjoy. I'm just saying, if I was an author, I probably wouldn't do that. I'd kind of go after universal themes that would make the story last forever because everybody can relate to it no matter when you were born or where. So, and that's definitely we there is an obvious theme in this story. I think about like internet providers and like monopolies. So we'll get to that later. So that's pretty interesting. Again, I said this podcast is not going to go too much into politics, but when it's a part of the story, it's hard to not like talk about it. I'm just not going to dive too deep into it. So that's Terry Pratchett. Definitely check out some of his other works, and you can learn more about him if you want to go down more into his personal life and whatnot. You certainly can. So I'm excited, guys. Here we go. This is the start of our first book talk, and we're going to start here. The way I'm going to do this is I'm basically going to quickly summarize the section and then just talk about it. I, again, am learning how to do this in an effective way. So much happened in the first 3 chapters that I'm going to probably forget some things or some details. And that's where you guys will come in. If you guys have any good comments or remarks or insights, be sure to let me know in the Discord. I have a special section in the Discord for this specific book. And like anything you want to talk about. Maybe I missed something in one of the episodes, which I promise you I will be missing a lot of stuff because like there is a lot going on. There's different perspectives of characters. There's a lot of characters in the first 3 chapters, and there's just a lot. So it's very likely I'm going to miss something. And also the way Terry Pratchett writes, he has a lot of deep meaning, hidden meaning, a lot of stuff like that. Even in regards to like character names, which we'll get into. But anyways, again, that's on the Discord. And also, if you make great insights or comments or anything, I will mention your message on the podcast. Because again, I want this to be interactive. So yeah, definitely do that on the Discord. Can't stress that enough. Anyways, let's jump into this because it's been long enough. We'll start with the first prologue, which is a 9,000 year prologue. So this is, I assume, 9,000 years before this story begins. And basically, this is a description of underwater rivers. This is a river that is under the oceans that not most people know about, but essentially it's so deep in the water that it's so dense that it just things float in the water. Like they no longer sink, and they just are pushed by this underwater river. And it just mentions that there's all these ships down there that are just floating and traveling around the world, and most people don't even know it's happening, and they've got skeleton crews. And obviously it's not literal skeletons that are alive, but it just means it's dead bodies that are on these ships that are just endlessly traveling around the earth. Or not around, I guess. Well, I mean, it's a disc, right? So I don't know how they're traveling, but yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. But what was really interesting, first off, I was like, where's this going? Like, I don't know how this relates to the story. I wonder if, because this is about a postal service and bringing back a postal service, government function. I wonder if the main character is going to do something with this underground river. How is it going to come into play? That is the question. I really don't know. But what was most interesting was in the last couple paragraphs of this prologue, it describes sometimes an anchor drops and it goes all the way to the bottom because the anchor's heavy. and it disrupts the ground and the silt on the ground, and it throws up a cloud of dirt or whatever. And then it mentions a character. So there's a character at the bottom of this ocean, and his name is Anghammarad. And we don't know anything about him. It just says one nearly hit an anchor. One nearly hit Anghammarad, where he sat watching the ships drift by far overhead. He remembered it because it was the only really interesting thing to happen in the last 9,000 years. That's it. That's all we got. And it's just, you finish that and you're just kind of like, what? What is that? Who's this? Who is this? And again, I might mention some things that you'll discover in the future of the first 3 chapters. And of course, please be watching this after you read the first 3 chapters, because I'm not going to spoil anything in future chapters. I'm just going to talk about the 3 and the things I've discovered in these chapters. So I'm thinking that Anghammarad is a golem, because there's golems in this story. There's one called Pump, which we'll talk about later, but they're almost like these, it's almost like AI. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't drink, they don't rest. They just keep walking and walking. Water can't stop them. Oceans can't stop them. They're just a machine that can speak too. You can interact with them. So it's almost like AI that just never rest. And they're made out of clay. And they're created by a scroll. Like there's a scroll in their head or something like that, where they have a set of rules that they have to follow. They can't hurt anybody unless told otherwise by authorities. So yeah, they're just this never-ending machine. And so they can't really die because they're not really alive. It's weird. The golems in this are weird. They're clay. They're like this lifeless but alive machine. And I wonder if the Anghammarad is a golem at the bottom of the ocean watching everything happen. Again, that's just a prediction. I don't know for sure. But we'll talk about the golems later when we kind of talk about Pump, who's the character, which is a great name, Pump. Anyways, let's move on to the next prologue, which is the 1 month prologue. And this is where things get a bit more interesting. This is where there's an important information about the monopoly that is going on in Morpork, which is the city where this story is taking place. So it describes, it talks about clacksmen. Clacksmen are men who take care of these giant towers. So there's these giant towers that just kind of like shift in the breeze. They're like a big tree. They kind of bend to the wind, and they're like semaphores. They're for communication. So messages are relayed between these towers with lights at night, and I believe with colors during the day. And they just relay information and messages, and it's really fast and it's really convenient. But the whole city is just littered with these semaphore towers, and it doesn't say that in this prologue, but it's mentioned later in I think the 3rd chapter. And it describes a young man who is repairing one or taking care of one, doing maintenance on one of these towers. And he actually falls and dies, which is like pretty gut-wrenching when they describe it, because it says this, the very last paragraph: there was a clink. He looked back and saw the snap hook of his safety rope lying on the walkway, saw the shadow, felt the terrible pain in his fingers, heard the scream, and dropped. So yeah, there's this young man who's taking care of one of these towers, and I guess something bad happens. His safety lock is, someone undoes his safety lock. Now, it doesn't necessarily say that. That's what I assume when he says there's a clink. Does someone like unhooked it? Possibly. And I only say that because later in chapter 3, there is a debate amongst these businessmen who run the businesses of these towers, that there's a supposed potential murder on their hands. Now, of course, these businessmen argue that it was an accident, and it happens all the time. And even this the beginning of this prologue mentions a disease that Klaxman got, where basically they have this weird sensation that they can fly, and they simply just walk off the towers believing that they can walk in the sky. And they don't really know why this happens, because anyone who's affected by this never survives. So it's almost like, is there a disease or someone pushing these people off? Like, what's going on? But yeah, no, I thought this was a pretty interesting prologue, and this does give us some insight to the story. So that out of the way. So that's a prologue, very short prologue, couple pages. Let's get started with the first chapter. And what I'm going to do is each chapter is broken up into multiple sections. I don't know how to approach. I think next time I read the next 3 chapters, I'm going to take notes, because there's a lot of stuff that I found really interesting that I kind of forgot about. I'm not going to stress about it. I'm going to do the best I can in terms of breaking this down. But yeah, I think next time I'm going to take notes, quote certain quotes that I thought were interesting. And again, this is a bit of a learning lesson for me. So anyways, chapter 1, we get introduced to the main character, who is Moist von Lipwig. What a name. Now, there's obviously some symbolism or something going on with his name, Moist von Lipwig. Now, Lipwig is another term for a mustache, like a fake mustache, a lip wig. So that was pretty, I don't know. It's funny because Moist von Lipwig, the main character, he's a trickster. He's a con man, a non-violent con man, very smart, very good at analyzing people and learning how to manipulate them, knowing what they like, knowing what they don't like, and trying to trick them, trying to take their money. And he's apparently really good at it. And supposedly he has one of those faces that nobody can really put their finger on. He looks like a lot of people. He doesn't look like a lot of people. And that really helps him with his scheming and getting away from authorities and getting away with robbing people. Nobody can really, and he has also all these different personas. So that's where it's interesting, because right now he's in prison. He's not being charged as Lipwig, but rather he's being charged, I believe, Alfred Spangler. Alfred Spangler is a persona he has. So he's being charged as Alfred Spangler. And it just says like he's going to be executed by hanging as Alfred and not by Lipwig. And he goes, at least there's that. At least I'm not bringing shame to my name or whatever. And what was really interesting about this first chapter is the fact that obviously this is the main character, and obviously he's not going to die here, or this would be a very short story. So we're watching him dig out of his cell. So he's got this spoon, then he's been carving away at mortar around a stone, and he's been hiding the debris into his mattress. And he says something like, oh, thank goodness they don't check the mattress, because they would see that it was very heavy. And what was so funny about this is because as a reader, you kind of expect him to escape because, well, he's the main character. And he finally gets through the stone. He pushes the stone, and when he pushes it out of the way, he finds another spoon sitting there behind the stone, and then stone behind the spoon. And I had to reread that a couple times because I was like, what is going on here? Like, he found a spoon, and then all of a sudden it says that the warden, Mr. Wilkinson, begins clapping. So it was all just a big game. It was just a joke for him. And it was the dialogue shows that, he's talking with the warden, Mr. Wilkinson. And he's like, what is this, some sort of sick game? And Wilkinson's basically says it gives prisoners a sense of hope. And he says it in the most like sincere way too. It wasn't like this is some trick or like torture or something. It genuinely, I guess it like makes the prisoners function a little bit better by giving them some hope. Instead of being just utterly self-destructive and they're about to be killed, they think, hey, maybe they're going to get out. And they describe one prisoner actually getting through some stone and getting into some, I think it was some water work or something, but eventually they caught him too. And nobody escapes, and there's this fake sense of hope. And I thought that was really interesting because it was such a curveball, and it was funny. it was funny too because Mr. Wilkinson, the warden, he's clapping as Lipwig breaks through the stone, and I thought it was going to be one of those like claps of like I don't know how to describe this, like kind of looking down on him, like way to go, idiot, you know, you did it. But the way he talks, he was like actually supportive, as like a teacher talks to a young student as they did as like some assignment or something. It's like, great job, buddy, you did it, you know. It was just funny. And then he describes that this wasn't his idea, but Lord Veterinary's idea. So Lord Veterinary is described as this like this, he's the ultimate ruler, right? They don't have a democracy. He's like the king, so to speak, the tyrant, some describe him as, which we'll get to more of that later. Veterinary, and I believe that's how you pronounce the name, Veterinary. By the way, if I mispronounce any, I'm terrible with names, especially fantasy names. So if I'm mispronouncing anything, let me know. And that way I can correct it later on. I'm not ashamed to say that I do struggle with names, but I'll do the best I can. Lord Veterinary, this was his idea, and this gives us a little bit of insight about who Lord Veterinary is. He's actually a really interesting character, really intelligent, really, in a way, kind of like Lipwig. He understands people. He understands the human condition, I suppose. So it's pretty interesting. We'll learn more about him later because you'll see how intelligent he is and how creative he is later on in the story. But eventually, you know, nothing works out. Mr. Wilkinson, I think he really likes Lipwig because Lipwig is the ultimate manipulator. I think he tried to sweet talk Mr. Wilkinson, become his friend, and just another way to try to get out of prison, right? But eventually it doesn't work, and he's taken to his execution. So he's taken to the stage, the execution stage, where they hang someone. And this is so funny. This intro to the story is really funny, and I was laughing a lot of the times, but the interaction in the next section, the interaction with Lipwig and the hangman is so funny because the hangman, again, he's so like, just, I don't know, when you envision an executioner or hangman, they're kind of cold, they're just kind of there, they're wearing a black, hood over their face to hide their identity because they're executioners. They don't want to be known, in the public eye. So their conversation is so just like, the hangman's just like, hey buddy, how's it going? Can you sign my rope? That was so funny when he's like, sign the rope? You want me to sign the rope? So basically he makes money collecting these ropes because there's a lot of infamous prisoners that he's killed, and it's worth money. He's like, the rope is worth money, but it's worth even more when the person signs it. It was just a funny dialogue between the two, and I really enjoyed that a lot. I think his name was Mr. Trooper, was the hangman's name. There's a lot of names here I might forget, especially if they have a very small part. But yeah, Mr. Trooper, and he signs it. And what the absolute I think the funniest part so far of this entire story is when he's about to, there's a crowd out there about to watch him get hanged, and he's standing up there, and the hangman, I think Mr. Trooper, he's like, okay, what are your last words? So during this time, he sees a coach out there. It's a black coach, and he recognizes it as Lord Veterinary's sigil. It's like black on black or something. His sigil is just black. And he sees it, and he's thinking, oh, this is like a scare tactic. They're not going to actually kill me. I'm a petty criminal. I've never killed anyone. I've never hurt anybody. I've just stolen some gold. They're not going to execute me. This is just all for show. So he has this in his mindset of like, this is just going to be a silly little charade. Not a big deal. So he's watching and he's expecting someone to come out of that coach and stop the whole thing. He's expecting Lord Veterinary to come out and be like, okay, that's enough. He's been scared. This is all over. This is just a show. Because we also saw the tricks with the stone and the mortar, right? When he thought he was escaping, but it was just a trick. And I think he's thinking the same thing. So eventually, Veterinary's assistant comes out of the coach and he's sitting there and the hangman's like, all right, come on, man. I've got a job to do. What's your last words? You know, you wouldn't want me to get in trouble. It's just so funny. So he's like, and he's waiting because he's expecting this assistant to stop the entire show. And then sure enough, the assistant shows up and he's waving at the hangman. And I was like, okay, this is it. Like, obviously, they're not going to kill this character. They're just not, because he's the main character. And so he walks up and it says here, I want to read this because this is so funny. It says, the hangman glanced down at the clerk, which is the assistant of Veterinary, who's walked up from the coach, who'd struggled to get to the front of the crowd. It says, I bring a message from Lord Veterinary, the man shouted. And Moist goes, right. So like, oh, here we go. And then this is the funny part. He says to get on with it. It's long past dawn. It was just so funny. I laughed so loud there because you're expecting like some kind of hope or some kind of twist in the story where he's going to get out of this. And it's like, and Lipwig is so like, oh, here he comes. Okay, this is it. And he's like distracting. He's like doing everything to delay the hanging. And then this guy comes up and he's like, get on with it. What are you doing? It was just so funny. So funny. I enjoyed that so much. Anyways, eventually he says his last words and they actually hang him. And I'm thinking, where is this going? So then it says, Alfred Spengler died. And that is not a literal sense. That is a metaphoric sense because obviously Lipwig does not die. He doesn't die. So that was an also awesome couple scenes that I thought were really funny. I really enjoyed the dialogue there. I really enjoyed it's just an easy read. Like the way he writes Terry Pratchett, it's just really enjoyable, really easy, really funny, and it's just the characters are great. So far so good. I've really enjoyed this book so far. So anyways, Lipwig, this is in the next section here. He wakes up and this is when he's talking to Veterinary. So Veterinary's right in front of him. His neck hurts. So obviously the rope didn't kill him. And that was by design. That is because the hangman, he's an expert at his job and he knows where to place the rope perfectly around someone's neck where it just knocks them out instead of actually killing them. So this is his second chance to life. And metaphorically, I believe the scene is that, okay, your past life is dead. Metaphorically, who you were as a person is gone. Your personas are dead, everything. Now you're just Lipwig. You're truly who you are. And that was kind of the metaphoric death there of that hanging. And so what happens is, of course, you guys know this, you read it, Veterinary offers him two options. And there's always a choice. That's what he said. There's always a choice. You can either walk out that door and die. Basically, he'll be killed. Or you'll accept this job of running the post office. Which is like, what? What do you mean running the post? What are these? And he's like, of course I'm going to run the post office. Duh. Because in his head, he's thinking about how he's getting out of this situation. Which is classic Lipwig, you know. So naturally, I think Veterinary explains that everyone has an angel. And basically, it's not a literal angel to Veterinary. What he's describing here is that basically everyone gets a second chance. And that is your angel. And this is his angel. His angel is that he's getting a second chance, and that is to run the post office. Which is really weird. Because, of course, when we think of running a post office in our world, it's like, you know, it's like, why would you need a con artist to run a post office? Like, what's the catch? You know, it doesn't make sense. I was so intrigued. It was like, where's this going? Like, why does he have to run a post? Obviously, I knew it had something to do with the post office. It's called Going Postal, but there's something more to this, of course. So he signs the contract and he's like, all right, I'll do it. And he's going to get paid. He's free to walk around in the city. It's like a whole new life. You know, there's no restrictions. I think he does have a parole officer, or if I'm remembering correctly, but more or less, this is a new start to a new life that is pretty good considering where he was in a prison trying to escape and being potentially executed. So not too bad. But this, of course, Lipwig, we find that he does not stay in the city of Moorpork, which is, I'm sure there's a symbolism behind that name, the city Moorpork. I don't know what that exactly means, but yeah, I'm sure somebody can bring some insight behind that name. But essentially, he escapes. He cons some people. He has a great way of I think what was really funny is this, like, he was talking about a false sense of hope. He hid a map. So he had treasures around different locations, and when he was in prison, they were constantly trying to figure out where he hid his money. And he had a map, I think, in his jacket, but the map is fake. It's false. And so when they took that map from him, he said, I'm giving them hope. So it was kind of like he turned it on them. He's like, they think they have the map of my treasures, and it's going to give them a false sense of hope, you know, which I thought was pretty funny. But he's a con man. He's got all these different techniques. He tricks this man of selling a cheap ring. He gets a bunch of money. He gets better horses. He's running. He's fleeing. He goes to this little town. Forgot the name of the town. Was it Hapley, I think? And he just rents a room there. It's a small town. And he's in the room. And then all of a sudden, of course, we get the introduction to Pump. Pump is the golem. He is the stone golem. So the door is kicked open into his room. Instinctively, he jumps out the window because he's used to this kind of thing. You know, he's used to people hunting him down. And of course, he tries to escape, which he doesn't. And it says, I think at the end of the section, which I thought was so funny, that he falls into a big thing of something soft. He's near a stable, so I can imagine it's probably like horse poop or something. And it's like, the good news, I fell into something soft and squishy. The bad news is I fell into something soft and squishy. I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, the golem, it was weird because it doesn't, of course, we don't know how golems really function at this stage of the story, but he's obviously got super strength. He picks up Lipwig, puts him on his shoulder, and walks him all the way back to the city. Now, it's mentioned later that Pump the golem, he has some sort of device or ability to constantly know where Lipwig is. So it doesn't matter how far he goes, where he goes, Pump will know where he is. And it's funny because when the golem goes up to him and he goes, you know, he's like, Mr. Lipwig, he's like, no, it's Lipvig. It's pronounced Lipvig. So for now on, the golem calls him Lipvig. I don't know if that it was him messing with him or it's legit pronounced Lipvig, which might be the case. I don't know, but I just go with Lipwig. But I thought that was pretty funny. It's just a small little thing. I don't think it really adds anything to the story, but I thought it was funny. So anyways, the golem takes him back to Veterinary, and it was almost like Veterinary knew this was going to happen because he doesn't really like punish him for this. And he's like, he reminds them, everybody has an angel, but only one. So basically saying, if you do this again, it's over for you. And so then the story really starts to pick up here. And this is where I really enjoyed it. The characters in the post office. So let's see, where are we in the book actually? I don't even know. So we're at chapter 2, I believe. Yeah. So chapter 2, I got my book out here. Chapter 2 is when he he goes back. He sees the post office for the first time, and it's just run down. There's graffiti everywhere. It's just old. There's like signs on on uh on the wall that are like falling apart, and it says something on the wall like, no matter the weather, so neither rain nor snow or nor gloom can gloom of something can stay these messengers about their duty. Basically, like, the post office was this prestigious, honorable thing. Like, no matter what, they're going to deliver these pieces of mail. And then later there's a sign next to it. So Lipwig points it out, and this is Pump telling the Golem, telling him about the history of this post office. So he asks Pumps, he points over to the side and he goes, and that stuff, Moist pointed, on a board much further down the building. It's peeling paint, or less heroic words. It says, don't ask about rock trolls with sticks, all sorts of dragons, Mrs. Cake, Hooge Green, things with teeth, any kinds of black dogs with orange eyebrows, reigns of spaniels, fog, Mrs. Cake. And Pump goes, I said it was a proud institution. So I don't know essentially what this sign says. I don't know what it means, but I thought it was funny. It's like, don't ask about trolls or sticks of all sorts of dragons. I don't know if it was like later on, like, messengers stopped delivering as much during, like, because of certain circumstances. And it was just funny that, like, that momentary pause where Pump was like, I said it was a proud institution. It's not now. But he walks in, and it's like this big building, and it's dusty. It's dark. There's pigeons everywhere. There's poop everywhere, pigeon poop, because I'm sure they use the pigeons to deliver messages and whatnot. And he's just walking around, and Lipwig sees this giant pile, which he believes is pigeon poop, all pigeon poop. And he's just like, oh, it's disgusting. It's gross. And that is when we get the introduction to a very funny character, Groat, Mr. Groat, who is like, he's the senior postman. He's an old man. He's got a messed up beard, wrinkled face, and he's very unorganized and very messy. And he's very strange, Mr. Pump. Like, he doesn't trust doctors. He has his natural, quote unquote, natural remedies where he's like, I don't know, he's got these lozenges, that he uses for he's like always coughing. Like, he's coughing really bad, and he uses his own home remedy. He's like, it keeps the pipes well, working. I'd surely be dead if I went to the doctors, which is probably not true. It's probably worse for him. Yeah, so he's this weird character that's just unorganized. Or no, he's the junior postman, not the senior. Yeah, sorry. He's the junior postman. But yeah, he's just this funny character that's just like weird. Like, he's just really weird. And there's something going on with him. There's something that, and this is something that Lipwig kind of mentions, is that there's something happening to him that he's not 100% honest about. And of course, we discover this later about the talking letters. There's some sort of talking thing in the post office that is very scary, which we'll talk about a little bit later here. But Groat is, it's just a little old guy that who's just kind of weird, and he has a chemical smell because he puts something in his socks or shoes. Yeah, like when he walks, he leaves around a dusty trail. Again, it's just like some sort of home remedy because he doesn't trust doctors. But then we get introduced to the next post office worker, and these guys have just, he says something funny too. This was a pretty funny scene when he meets Groat. Groat's like, yeah, I've been keeping the post office functioning and clean. And Lipwig, or Moist, looks around and he goes, yeah, I see that, because it's just like a mess. There's poop and dust, and it's just gross. And he's like, yeah, great job. Like, it was pretty funny. But there's like letters everywhere. So they discover that the huge mound of pigeon poop is actually a huge mound of letters that is covered with pigeon poop. And they mentioned that the pigeon poop like protects the letters. You know, it's like it's a protective shell around the letters, because he orders Pump to start digging up those letters, and that's where, you know, that's where Grote has an issue, because it doesn't say it right away, but Lipwig says, "Hey Pump, go. Do you work for me?" He's like, "Yeah, just you know, golems live to work. Essentially, they don't protest, so they'll just do whatever told." And Lipwig's like, "Hey, grab a shovel and start shoveling that poop." And then you see Grote like kind of like, "Oh, what are you doing? Like, don't do that." Because it's just a big mound of letters, and he's like overly protective of these old letters that some are like hundreds of years old, you know? But anyways, eventually he takes them down to the basement. There's like a basement locker, and that's what they use as their office, because everywhere else in the building is full of letters, which it's funny, and they use the basement because it's just moist, you know. So yeah, they say it's so moist that it would damage the letters, so it's the only place where they can be where there's no letters. And I thought that was pretty funny. The introduction to the... Sorry, I feel like I'm just summarizing the book rather than really... I don't want to... Because you guys already read... Again, this is a learning lesson, or learning experience, not a lesson. If I'm summarizing too much, let me know, because you guys have already read it, so you know everything that's going on. I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm summarizing and explaining things I like along the way. So if this is bad, let me know. I'll try to change it up. You know, I even thought about getting a co-host, because I think it'd be really refreshing to have someone else kind of bring up some insight that I missed potentially, and vice versa. But yeah, I thought it was funny. And then we get introduced to, was it Stanley? Yeah, Stanley. Now this guy's weird. This was funny. He's kind of like this weird, strange kid. He's younger, and of course he has the fascination of pins. He's like a pin collector, and he's like super organized. You know, he's super anal about everything. He's like the total opposite of Grote. And Grote, you know, it's funny because he like tries to control him with his pin addiction or his fascination, and he just like, if he doesn't have his pins, he just freaks out. So, and also the funny part that I really enjoyed is that they describe that there's a line between their two areas. They have their own areas, and they can't cross that line. And one side is all messy and dirty, which is Grote's, and the other side is his, which is all organized. And he's very like, you know, it's funny. And they even said like, if a piece of paper crossed that line, Stanley would like cut the paper perfectly so it wouldn't be on his side. It was pretty funny. Stanley is definitely a hilarious character, because when he goes into detail about his pins, and I guess he writes a journal that they sell at at pin shops. It's took a turn that I didn't expect. You know, the pin dialogue of all these pins. And what I found really interesting was Pump's backstory. So as the story continues, of course, we get insight into Pump, why his name is Pump. So his full name is Pump 19, because I think for like thousands or hundreds of years, he was underwater turning on and off a pump. And that was his existence. And that's what I mean by these golems. They just kind of live to serve. They have no free will, it seems like. They can talk and communicate, but they just kind of are there and they function. They're a machine, more or less, than a being, an actual person. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. We're getting more backstory behind golems and their role in society, which I think is going to play an important part, because of course when Lipwig goes to that golem rental shop where you can rent or sell golems. And we meet Miss Deerheart was her name, I think. So let's see. I wrote it down here somewhere. Yeah, Deerheart, which I think is going to become a love interest. We'll get to that. But yeah, that's essentially, essentially he gets, Lipwig is getting familiar with the post office. And then in the third chapter, it really starts to branch out with all these different types of characters and storylines, which things get a little bit more complicated. So, of course, Lipwig wakes up. He walks around. So the next day, this is like day 2 of working at the post office. He slept like on a huge pile of letters, and he found a letter this was also pretty interesting. He found a love letter that was never sent, and it was about a girl, showing her affection and her want to be with somebody, some guy or something. And he was sitting there. I thought this was pretty interesting because he was sitting there just thinking like, man, like, what happened? Did these two people get together? Was their fate dealt by the fact that this post office shut down and their mail was never delivered? And I thought that was pretty interesting. And he kind of puts that letter in his pocket, which of course becomes important later. But another interesting thing about chapter 2 was the argument between Lipwig and Groat when they're talking about these letters and how he's very protective. Groat is very protective of these letters. And Lipwig is just kind of like, bro, like, do you really care? Like, why can't we just destroy some of these letters because they're taking up all this space? Some of them are over 100 years old. So he's like, well, they got to be delivered. You can't tamper with mail. That's a crime. That's what Groat's saying. And he's like, Lipwig, I thought it was funny when he was like, okay, we'll deliver mail to dead people or vampires, which I believe are vampires are a thing in this world. So I thought that was pretty funny. Just the whole interaction with Groat is really interesting, and there's really something mysterious about him. And he's kind of like a lovable idiot. Groat is, in my opinion, when you hear about him. He's interesting. There's something going on that is deeper than surface level. So for me, Groat, and of course in chapter 3 they kind of explain that. So let's talk about chapter 3 as we're closing in on the last chapter here of this podcast. So this is where Lipwig, he wakes up and he's hungry. He tells Pomp, hey, I'm gonna go out and get some food. He gets some food, and this is where he comes across the pin shop. And the pin shop is funny as hell. I really enjoyed the interaction with the pin shop and the guy who runs the pin shop, which I forgot his name. I think it was like David or something, but they described him as having like a gut belly for 3 people. Like he's just got a big gut belly. Like I just envisioned kind of like, I don't know, like a nerdy fat comic book guy, kind of thing. And his dialogue was really funny when he's like looking at pins. And then of course, what I thought was funny was when Lipwig notices the journal, the magazine written by Stanley, and he's like gonna buy it, and the guy working there is like, don't get that. The person who writes that book is kind of weird. I thought that was funny. Again, great humor. And eventually he goes in and buys some pins, but I believe I think he's doing this to get so one thing I kind of missed that is really interesting is that I almost feel like Groat might be a bad guy. And Lord Veterinary knows there's something going on with the post office, and he wants someone who's very skilled at analyzing people and very intelligent to figure it out. Because Groat, like I said, there's more to him than meets the eye, and you can see that Lipwig is analyzing their characters to manipulate them. He's trying to figure out more from these characters, trying to and that's why he goes to the pin shop, because he's trying to earn the trust and gain the insight into Stanley, and just try to figure out who he is as a person. So when he's in this pin shop, what's really funny to me is when, if I can find the exact quote, there's a couple funny scenes in this third chapter, but essentially, I'll just paraphrase here. Essentially, he goes in the pin shop and he's looking for extra sharp pins. And and the guy working there is like, well, we keep those in the back, with kids and all. And he takes it out and it's in this like case or whatever. Or Dave, that's his name, Dave. Yeah, he opens it up and Dave's like, yeah, you see it? Yeah, see it? And Dave's like, or Moist is like, oh wow. But inside he's thinking it's just a stupid pin. Like, it's just a pin. He's just pretending like he's like intrigued by it. So I think he buys this like extra sharp pin. I don't know where this is gonna lead, but I just thought that was funny when he was like, oh wow, like it's a pin, But then he goes to a grocery store, I believe, and drops off the letter to the person. So remember that letter I mentioned, that the love letter, he drops that off to the person that was for, and he has children. So because this was like 50 years ago, so he has children now, and so Moist is thinking like, did he have a family after all, even though this letter didn't get to him? Did he have a family and it all worked out anyways, even though he didn't get the letter? I thought that was pretty interesting because it's showing like the importance of mail, especially in a time where it was like there was no telephones. I mean, this is a fantasy world, but there's no telephones or anything. And I think mail is really important, right? It's important information that needs to get to people. Even today, mail is very respected. Even though I get tons of spam mail, junk mail, all the time, which is so annoying. That should be illegal. That's so annoying. You just get mail and it's just a bunch of junk and advertising. It's just, it's so annoying. Because sometimes your important mail gets lost with the junk mail and you accidentally throw it out and it's a big mess. It's a big mess. But anyways, I thought that was a pretty interesting scene when he actually goes and delivers that mail. And this is like his literal first piece of mail that he delivered. And yeah. I think he kind of liked it. He's like, this was kind of cool. So this was like his first introduction into delivering mail. So that was a cool scene. Now that's the end of chapter 2, I believe. No, that's the beginning of chapter 3. So of course later we get the perspective of Groat, which apparently there's some dwarves living on top of the post office. And that is how that's how he gets his money. So they pay rent on top of this post office. And the interaction between these dwarves and Groat is so funny because the dwarves are obviously up to something. They're like making something and they're just like, they're lying to Groat about what they're doing. And I think Mr. Winton is the name of the dwarf. And they said he has such a big beard, it was worth like 3 dwarven beards. Anyways, they're testing out woodpeckers. So they're seeing if woodpeckers make a good mail system rather than pigeons. And they say, why? Like, what? Like, or Groat's like, why would you do woodpeckers? It's like, because they can fly during the night. And so they're having this conversation. Obviously, they're lying to Groat, and Groat is just oblivious. He's very gullible, and that's what makes this really funny. So anyways, he takes the rent from them. That's how he pays for food, and he keeps up with the post office. And he hasn't told Lipwig about these rental people that are living in a shack on the top of the post office. And these dwarves are up to something, but we don't really know. They're obviously lying to Groat, and Groat is believing it. But this is so funny. He's talking about, so Groat is, yeah, there's also a Carlton dwarf. So I think there's 3 dwarves up there and they're working on something. Anyways, after this conversation, this is what I thought was so funny. When when they're talking about the woodpeckers, I guess he's up there thinking that they're gonna work. They're like keeping up with the pigeon system of like mailing, and they called themselves, oh, what did they call themselves? Like pigeon something. Like they're pigeon experts, but it's all just made up, and they're just clearly doing something there that we don't know yet. And he's talking to Grote, and this is so funny. The last paragraph here was pretty funny. Is that was a bit hurtful. Someone thinking that he couldn't be trusted. And as he eased his way down the long ladder, so he's going down the ladder because that's how he gets up to the roof. He climbs a ladder. Grote wondered if he ought to have pointed out that woodpeckers wouldn't fly in the dark. It was amazing. The bright lads like them hadn't spotted this flaw. They were, he thought, a bit gullible, which is so funny because Grote is the one who's gullible in believing that they're actually testing on woodpeckers to see if they would deliver mail. I laughed pretty loud at that part because it's just like Grote was oblivious to the fact that he's the one being gullible. It was just a nice little witty little bit there that I thought was really funny. But there is something, I feel like this is big to the story. Like, what are these people doing? They're clearly, because he said he closed the door and he heard them like whispering, like, you know, like they're up to something. It's like, did he believe it? Did he believe it? You know, did he believe our story? But yeah, so there's something going on with that. But yeah, and then the third chapter, this is the end. Well, okay, first off, before we get to the very end of the third chapter, let's talk about Miss Dearheart, who is this woman that works at a rental shop. I forgot the name of it. Yeah, giant clearance sale. So she's working at the shop that apparently was smashed. So some people like went in and smashed. It's called the Golem Trust. That's what it's called. And the glass was just like destroyed and it's boarded up. So I think what Moist is doing here, Lipwig, is he's understanding these three characters, Grote, Stanley, and the Golem. He's trying to understand them so he can learn how to manipulate them. And he wants to especially learn how the Golem pump works. Because as Veterinary said, you know, he's going to hunt you down. Sure, he's slow and he only goes at a moving pace, but he doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, he doesn't get tired. He can go through oceans. No, it doesn't matter where you go, you will be tracked down and eventually hunted. So I think he's trying to figure out how to stop that, you know? So we're in this. I don't think Lipwig at this point is fully dedicated to this job. I think he's just going through the motions because he has to, or he dies. And I think he's trying to unravel the characters, the people around him, and trying to figure out how he can manipulate them to, you know, escape and get away from this. But who knows? Maybe he ends up loving his job and taking it very seriously, which, you know, could be the case. But yeah, he goes into the store, he opens the door, and there's a woman in there who is aiming a crossbow at him as he walks in. And eventually, you know, she puts it down. She's like, oh, you're a customer. She's smoking a cigarette. I don't know why that was important, but she's like smoking and exhaling very quickly. And Moist kind of found that attractive or something. She's wearing like a simple tight dress, a gray dress. So clearly in the dialogue, I think we have our love interest here with Miss Dearheart. And he found her, you know, strangely attractive. But anyways, she brings up some insight about golems, and she talks about golems buying their freedom. So golems, and this store she doesn't own the store. She works there. It's run by golems. So I don't know. This kind of reminds me of like, I don't know exactly if there's any real life analogy to this, and I don't necessarily want to dive too deep into this, but basically golems get their freedom by renting golems, which kind of sounds interesting. It talks about it's interesting because there is a sense of like golems wanting freedom, even though they're just like in I don't know, it's weird. This whole conversation was pretty interesting because Miss Deerheart, she explains that golems are just machines and they just live to work. But then at the same time, she explains that they are property that own itself. That's something that Lipwig says. It says here, she explains, they understand about free will. They also understand that they don't have it. Mind you, once a golem owns himself, it's a different matter. That's where Lipwig says, own? How does property own itself? You said they were, and then she cuts them off. They save up and buy themselves, of course. So that's their only path to freedom. So if they're buying themselves and getting freedom, you got to believe that they have some sense of free will. But yeah, she works for them. And yeah, this rental golem place. It's pretty interesting. It'll be interesting where that leads. I would like to see Pump free because I really like Pump the character. Pump is yeah, he's just like funny. He's like a good guy, you know, like he doesn't complain. And like when I hear him talk, I give him a very like in my head, I give him a very like deep like, hello, Mr. Lipwig, you know, like very slow, very like he's just like he is what he is kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see if Lipwig gives Pump his freedom or something of that nature. It'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Anyways, that was that was an interesting scene. There's a lot of insight with you know, Moist going to that rental shop, the Golem Trust. Sorry, when I say Golem, I keep wanting to say Gollum, like Lord of the Rings Gollum. So I'm very careful when I say Golem. Anyways, now the final scene. And this is the final scene of the 3rd chapter. We are getting insight into the big business of these towers, these towering towers. And it mentions at the very beginning that these things are eyesores. Very first line, Lord Veterinary stood looking out of his window. His office had once a wonderful view of the city, and technically it still did, although now the roof line was a forest of clack towers, or clacks towers. Those are the semaphore towers that relay information. And I think, so this whole conversation between Lord Veterinary and then what people come in, these big business investors and businessmen walk in. We got Mr. Slant. We've got Horse Fry. And also, I think there was another one. But Horse Fry was definitely an interesting character because he's like Mr. Let's see, Slant, Horsefly, and Kilt. Yeah, Kilt, I believe, Cilt. Anyways, sorry, it's not important. What's important though is that Horsefly, he really pushes back on Veterinary because they're talking about like Veterinary's talking about the ethics of this business and how they run multiple competing businesses. And he's like, well, how does that work? You know, how can you work for multiple businesses and, you know, not screw over another business or whatever? And they said, we have a code of conduct. And it's like, it's a safeguard. So none of that happens. And he's like, well, what's the safeguard? It's like, we just don't talk about it. It's like, that's the safeguard. But so Lord Veterinary is kind of poking these guys. And I think it's a commentary about monopolies, big business, and the government's role in terms of regulating these businesses. Where does the government step in and where does it not? And what happens when these big business guys just have open free market and how out of control it can get? I think that is, you know, that again, not to go into politics too much, but that is the correlation. And I think the semaphore tower companies kind of represent internet, I can imagine. Again, I could be mistaken. Please, if you got some good insight, share it in the Discord because, you know, I'm not 100%. I'm not an expert at literary critical, you know, breaking down literature here. I'm sure there's a lot I'm missing. But yeah, they kind of just go into this interaction where there's this give and take between Mr. Horse Fry. I keep wanting to say horse fly, but Horse Fry. And there's a weird, like, they describe him as like fat, like this fat young guy, and he's naive, and like his double chins were like shaking in his aggression. And there's a little note, there's like a little footnote when describing his fatness, I guess. And it says down here, it is wrong to judge by appearances despite his expression, which was of a piglet having a bright idea, and his mode of speech, which might put you in mind of a small, breathless, neurotic, but ridiculously expensive dog. It was just funny because it's a footnote that explains something in more detail, but it just continues to insult him in his like character. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, so this is kind of the we're seeing two sides here, and Lord Veterinary, we're kind of like sympathizing for him a little bit because it seems like he genuinely cares about these towers and how they're ugly and they don't function all the time. And of course, he's trying to run the post office again. So it's like he might actually be a good guy, even though he kind of comes off as the bad guy. He's the Lord, he's the tyrant. He even says, to his aide, he's like, am I a tyrant? Do you think I'm a tyrant? And of course he's like, no, you're not a tyrant, But essentially at the end of this meeting, Lord Veterinary, I think he puts an investigation on Horse Fry. Because I think his guide was like, do you want us to investigate Mr. Slant? He goes, no, he's way too smart for that. He'll see that coming. Do the naive, ignorant horse Fry, he won't see that coming. Because again, he's this young buck kind of guy that, he thinks he knows the world better, whatever. And yeah. So yeah, he's gonna put the investigation on this guy. So that is gonna wrap up the first 3 chapters. I'm sure I missed a lot there, guys. And this was my first real book talk episode. Let me know. Again, I want to get better at this. I'm this is new to me. So any kind of criticisms, let me know. If you feel like I summarized too much, let me know. If you want me to delve more deep into like, hey, you don't have to explain step by step what's going on. I read it. Just tell us what you think of different characters and different scenes. That's awesome too. Again, I just want to get better at this, and your feedback will be fantastic, and I do appreciate it. I think there's one thing I forgot to mention is that there's a conversation. Sorry, this might be chapter 2, might be chapter 3. Again, I need to take better notes when I'm reading. We'll do that the next 3 chapters. But Grote and Stanley are talking about the voices, and that they're worried about the mail being moved because the voices will begin talking again. Was really creepy. I mentioned that earlier, but it was really, really creepy. And I guess there was an other postal service person that died. I don't remember. I might be misremembering, but I think they were talking about like, yeah, let's see. Oh man, if I could find it. But basically, they're talking about like, there's something going on with these letters where there's a voice, there's a force here, there's something happening here, and it can get angry and potentially harm them, and that's why they don't really move the letters and stuff. We'll get more into that probably later on in the story, but I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? Let me know if there's something I didn't cover or something you wanted to bring up about the first 3 chapters. Again, don't talk about anything of the future of the book because we're just not there yet. But yeah, so far, very fun, very interesting. I really enjoyed it. Very witty. It's just a blast to read. So I really enjoyed it so far. I love the characters so far, and I'm really excited to see where this is going to go. So the next podcast episode, like I said, we're going to cover 4, 5, and 6. and I'll do a little bit better job of taking notes here and really analyzing it. And again, any criticism, critiques, let me know in the Discord. Also, we have that Halloween special thing, so you don't miss out on that. That's going to be a fun little bonus podcast episode telling scary stories. I'm excited about that. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for today. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, support the podcast, leave a review. That helps a ton as well. If you leave some 5-star reviews or whatever you believe I deserve, whatever. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next podcast covering chapters 4, 5, and 6. And we'll see where the story goes from there. So thanks for watching, guys. And I'll see you in the next one.